problem is, this channel is run by someone who couldn't manage a target. Welcome back to Same Name, Different Game. And I know what you're thinking. Joey Pink, Radiant One, don't you only come around these parts in the springtime? Well, shut your mouth, punk. Let me tell you something. I go wherever I want, whenever I want. And you can call this a late Survivor Series special. You can call it a late Full Gear special. I don't really care. But I was thinking about Full Gear. Thinking. And I realized that with the rise of AEW, I have not yet covered the last promotion to truly challenge WWE's dominance in the pro wrestling space. World Championship Wrestling, WCW. Yeah, sure, I talked about an unreleased game a few years ago in an episode of SNDG Gaiden. But this is the first time we're giving WCW a full-on spotlight right here on the main roster. But before we get into this episode's game, the 25-year-old WCW versus nWo World Tour, we gotta get into a little history about the developer. The greatest developer to ever make 3D wrestling video games. AKI. And you know, Same Name, Different Game universe, to talk about those origins, we actually need to talk about the folks behind the best 2D wrestling games of all time, Human Entertainment. According to Audie Sorley's book on the history of wrestling video games, Wrestling with Pixels, there had been two groups at Human working on the Fire Pro Wrestling games. The main group for, well, the main series. The big stars getting the big push, if you will. Then a subgroup that worked on spin-off games like Fi Pro Women and the arcade entry, Blazing Tornado. According to Sorley, it was around the time of Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium, the ultimate entry for the Super Famicom, that the team was formally split into the Fire Pro team and a team internally called Muscle, who would make Iron Slam 96 for the PlayStation, the first 3D entry, the only 3D entry in the venerable Fi Pro series made by original publisher Human Entertainment. It was a bit of a failed experiment, if I'm being kind, with 1999's return to 2D gameplay, Fire Pro Wrestling G, now universally being held in higher regard. But that team, Muscle, they wanted another swing. According to Sorley's book, they wanted to make a 3D wrestling game unrestrained by having to use the Fire Pro timing system, so they struck out on their own. First under the name The Man Breeze, where they created virtual pro wrestling for the PlayStation. This game would come to the US in early 1997 as WCW vs. the World. The roster was pared down, but the game was largely intact, featuring a unique 3D grappling system, far different from Iron Slam 96. But that is a story for another day, SNDG maniacs. Right now, we gotta move on. Just like the Man Breeze moved on to become AKI, and talk about our first game for this episode, WCW versus nWo World Tour. In a situation similar to Super Double Dragon, the US version of this game came first, releasing in November of 1997 and coming with a very nice double-sided poster, one side showing the game itself and the other an ad for the upcoming Starrcade 1997 pay-per-view event, which would be the payoff to an angle that had been going for over a year. Hogan versus Sting for the WCW Heavyweight Championship. It was this poster and this event, and I suppose at the root of it all, this game that got me back to being a full-time wrestling fan. I had basically dropped out post-Hulkamania era in the WWF, and while I checked in from time to time, it wasn't until I started playing this game based on the strength of its multiplayer action and then watched Starrcade 97 with my friends that I was all the way back into watching wrestling every week without missing a show. And why not? This game was a revolution, particularly to fans in North America, where only importers and emulation junkies had even gotten a taste of Fire Pro Wrestling. The last wrestling simulation games on the previous generation systems, for want of a better term, were WCW Super Brawl Wrestling, which certainly has the best character select screen of all time, but little else, and WWF Raw, a game that is absolutely the best of its loosely tied series, but is certainly not a patch on this game. And while yes, the aforementioned WCW vs. the World on PS1 definitely was a cut above those two, this game was something else. A refined version of Versus the World, the first in a long line of refinements, and while it has its share of flaws, that didn't matter in the fall of 1997. This was 4-player, fully 3D wrestling mayhem, in and out of the ring, blood which had to be turned on in the options under realism for some reason, suplexes from the apron, springboard moves, team attacks, things that 16-bit grapplers just couldn't dream of. And looking at it now, it's easy to feel like I'm being hyperbolic. A pro wrestler being hyperbolic? Perish the thought. But it's true. This game felt like wrestling games just couldn't get better. And while we certainly were on the road to that eventually being true, but at the time, this was enough. The wrestlers all look goofy, including Ric Flair looking more like Dino Bravo. Some of their finishing moves aren't correct, like Scott Hall doing this sit-out pin version of a Splash Mountain Bomb rather than the true outsider's edge. There's only one arena with a few different canvases and ring skirts. The music is unremarkable to say the least, but to a 14-year-old in 1997, I promise you, none of that made a lick of difference. I cannot tell you what a relief it was to escape the old button mash to win grapples school of wrestling game design. The core mechanics of World Tour are not completely different from Versus the World, but they're stronger by way of being more streamlined. And these controls would be the basis for all of AKI's grapplers going forward. 1 button strikes, 1 grapples, and there are 2 defense buttons, 1 corresponding to each kind of attack. Short presses result in weak attacks, long presses result in strong attacks. That really is the gameplay in a nutshell SNDG universe, and while it's simple, it can offer surprisingly deep gameplay, which is why the AKI wrestling games persist in popularity even after all these years. And with a little more time to polish things up, AKI and publisher Asmik released the Japanese version of World Tour 25 years ago on December 9th, 1997. It's Virtual Pro Wrestling 64, and we'll talk about it after these messages.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following. Check out the all-new Super Play Plus lineup. T2, Smash TV, WWF Royal Rumble and The Simpsons. Super sound effects and graphics mean Powerhouse Play step into the ring with the hottest WWF superstars like Hulk Hogan and Bret the Hitman Hart. Body-slamming WrestleMania action is now on all video game systems. Get the Nintendo Double Player System from Acclaim. 2 controllers for head-to-head action, slow motion and rapid fire. The Double Player System, the power to move times 2.
It's WCW versus nWo World Tour. GamePro calls it one of the fall's hottest titles. Game Informer says it's the end-all, be-all of wrestling, featuring over 20 of WCW's and nWo's top wrestlers, a 4-player battle royal mode, and up to 40 moves per wrestler, including signature moves and foreign objects, all on Nintendo 64. Call now, 1-800-WCW-8661, or send $69.95 to the address on your screen. Also available wherever video games are sold.
Let me tell you something, SNDG universe. I'm the Radiant Joey Pink, and the reason that you ain't seeing an ad right here, me talking about headphones, underwear, some terrible mobile game that I would never play. Yeah, the reason for that is because this channel is 100% supported by viewers like you. Patreon, channel memberships, super thanks down below, one-time tips via Ko-Fi, and of course, merch sales. So if you like what you see, consider doing it, but in any case, enjoy the show, and let's get back to it.
プロレスゲームの決定版ついに登場 nWo WCW の参戦でレスラー数技数も大幅ボリュームアップしかも4人同時プレイも実現アスメックバーチャルプロレスリング64これ以上のプロレスゲームは望めない
Now, get all the action of GoldenEye, Kobe Bryant in NBA courtside for WCW versus nWo, or Diddy Kong Racing for new additions to the Player's Choice Library for just $39.95. Don't miss it.
Like so many regional differences, this game doesn't see anything in the way of gameplay changes. The core of the experience is the same, but AKI took that extra time to add a bit of spit and polish to the World Tour for the release of Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. The first thing you're going to notice is a considerably larger roster, and like those classic Fire Pro games, it's full of legally distinct, wink wink, nudge nudge, wrestlers who definitely aren't just obvious stand-ins for real wrestlers. You're going to see greats like Misawa and Muta here, alongside wrestlers who at the time were already legends like Andre the Giant and Terry Funk. And speaking of those latter two, that's another thing. There are way more unlockable grapplers in this version of the game. Tiger Mask, Dynamite Kid, the founder of Japanese professional wrestling Rikidozan, just to name a few. And all that means the motivation to capture every available title in this game is real. Yeah, it's still just a plain old series of matches, just like the US version for each title, but the wide and varied roster and a much better selection of hidden characters makes doing that a lot more palatable. I mean, who's more of a carrot on a stick? Glacier or Bruiser Brody? Yeah, that's what I thought. This one also introduces an edit mode, not seen in North America until WCW nWo Revenge. Now, don't get too excited, it's not a true edit mode in the sense of a Fire Pro game. You can't create a new custom wrestler, but you can change the gear on some of your favorites, including some gear not set as default for wrestlers like Misawa, who can be edited to revert to his Tiger Mask 2 gimmick. Finally, also like the US sequel, this one has the little animated referee. And that's about it for AKI's first effort on the Nintendo 64. This guy would have to wait a game to show up. But because there are some different music tracks in the Japanese version that were not included in the US version, I guess that means it's time to do like we always do, and take a look and to listen side by side. They look the same, and the music isn't really interesting enough on either game to get me to feel one way or another, honestly. So let's call it a draw. And that makes it time to give the edge. And you know something SNDG stirs? If I haven't made it clear, the roster additions alone mean that it goes to the Japanese version. With the English fan patch that's available that you just saw some footage of, there is no reason to even bother playing the US release, unless you're a physical cart collector. And if that's the case, hey, you're in luck, because the American version is actually way cheaper than the Japanese one. That does it for this installment, SNDG Universe. Just remember, I'm Joey Pink, and the pleasure was all yours. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. It's Joe. This episode was meant to go up between Survivor Series and Full Gear, and I got COVID over Thanksgiving. So the week of Thanksgiving, I got COVID. So yeah, that bumped that down the road a bit, but it's done now, and I hope you enjoyed it. You can get your name here with all these cool people if you want to support by Patreon or channel membership. If that's not your thing, you can go ahead and support in a number of other ways. Like I said in the little ad bumper, I enabled super thanks on the channel now, so you can do that. It's like a one-time tip thing. You can also do that by Ko-Fi, all that stuff. If you like the shirt that Joey Pink is wearing in this episode, it's available in a number of styles. Check out that link. The biggest thing you can do to help the channel out, honestly, though, is share this anywhere that people you know might enjoy this kind of stuff. Please do share it. Discord, Reddit, Twitter, whatever. And if you like more of this, on the left is the full playlist for all of the wrestling videos, the WrestleMania specials, and on the right is the most recent one, which is WWF in Your House.